They invited me to fill a chair, treating me like old furniture while worshiping my sister, Isabella. On Christmas Eve, my father pitied me, asking if I could make rent. He didn't know the failure across the table had signed a $150 million merger that morning. Dropping that number wasn't just an update, it was a death sentence for their ego. Want to watch them burn in regret? Sit down, and I will tell you everything. My name is Helena Briarwood, and as I navigated the treacherous curves of the drive leading up to the family estate on Lake Michigan, the heater in my rented sedan was fighting a losing battle against the Chicago winter. It was 28 degrees outside, and the wind coming off the lake felt personal, like a physical barrier trying to keep me away. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, not from the cold, but from the sheer force of will it took to keep driving toward the one place on earth where I felt most alone. The contrast was immediate and stinging. The driveway was lined with pristine, snow-dusted pines, leading up to the mansion that was ablaze with light. Every window glowed with a golden warmth, and festive wreaths hung from every sill. It was a house staged to perfection, a beacon of prosperity designed to celebrate the phantom success of my sister, Isabella. I parked my nondescript rental car behind my father's gleaming luxury SUV, the engine sputtering and dying with a pathetic wheeze. I walked up the path, the icy wind biting at my exposed face. I rang the doorbell and waited, and waited. I could hear music inside, the faint sound of laughter, but no one came. I stood on the doorstep for 5 full minutes, the snow gathering on the shoulders of my cashmere coat, which my family undoubtedly assumed was a thrift store find. When the heavy oak door finally swung open, it was my mother, Catherine. She did not smile. She did not drop the phone pressed to her ear. Instead, she offered me a sharp, impatient nod, her eyes scanning me up and down with critical assessment before she turned her back. She gestured violently toward the dark corner of the mudroom. "Just put them there," she mouthed, pointing at my boots, while listening to whoever was on the other end of the line. "Don't ruin the new Persian runner." I kicked off my boots in the shadows, just as I had done for the last decade, and stepped into the living room in my socks. The scene before me was like something out of a satirical movie. My father, Robert, was crouching awkwardly by the Christmas tree, holding a ring light, his face contorted in a grimace of forced concentration. In the center of the frame stood Isabella, 25 years old, and radiating a manic, polished energy. And that is how we are disrupting the eco-fashion space link in bio. "Love," Isabella chirped, blowing a kiss to the phone camera. My father cut the recording and immediately slumped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Great take, Bella. That one is going to go viral for sure." I stood by the archway, unnoticed. I drifted toward the fireplace, seeking a momentary distraction. The mantel was a shrine, crowded with silver-framed moments of triumph. There was Isabella in Paris, holding a baguette. Isabella at her debutante ball. Isabella cutting the ribbon at her first failed boutique. My eyes scanned the display for a trace of myself. I found one photo, tucked far to the left, partially obscured by a heavy crystal vase. In it, I was 12 years old, holding a math trophy. After that, I simply ceased to exist in this house. The visual record of Helena Briarwood ended the year I stopped being cute and started being smart. "Oh, you're here," my father said, finally acknowledging my presence. He didn't stand up. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I said, my voice steady. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the bottle of wine I had brought. It was a vintage Cabernet, a limited release that I had acquired from a private seller for $1,200. It had no flashy label, just a simple, elegant script on the neck. "I brought this for dinner." My father glanced at the bottle, his lip curling slightly. "Right. Well, just give it to Maria. She can use it for the braised beef sauce. We are only drinking the premium reserves tonight. Helena, we have a guest from the bank coming, and I don't want to serve table wine." I felt the familiar sting, sharp and hot in my chest, but I pushed it down. "Of course," I said, handing the bottle to the passing housekeeper. who looked at me with more sympathy than my own parents. Isabella floated over, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her like a cloud. She looked me over, her eyes lingering on my face, which wore no makeup, and my hair, which was pulled back in a practical bun. "You look tired, Helena," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Still doing that boring data entry work at that warehouse? I honestly don't know how you do it. I would die of boredom." "It pays the bills," I replied simply, a small, mysterious smile playing on my lips. I did not correct her. I did not tell her that the warehouse was actually the nerve center of stratosphere systems. I did not tell her that the data entry was the development of a proprietary algorithm that had revolutionized interstate logistics, and I certainly did not tell her about the phone call I had received at 8 o'clock that morning from my lead counsel. I could still hear his voice in my head. "The transfer is complete, Ms. Briarwood. $150 million has been deposited into your holding account. Congratulations." "Well, try to look a little more alive," Isabella said, turning back to her phone to check her notifications. "We have an image to maintain." Before I could respond, my mother hooked her arm through mine, her grip tight and controlling. She wasn't leading me to the sofa to catch up. She was steering me toward the kitchen. "Helena, listen," she whispered urgently, ensuring the others couldn't hear. "The timer on the main oven is finicky. I need you to stay in the kitchen and watch the turkey. We have very important guests arriving, Mr. Henderson from the bank, and we need to make a good impression in the living room. We can't have you hovering about making things awkward with your silence." "You want me to stay in the kitchen?" I asked, though I wasn't surprised. "Just until dinner is served. You know how you are with people. You make them uncomfortable. Just be useful, Helena." She patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be affectionate but felt like a dismissal, and breezed back into the living room to pour herself a drink. I stood alone in the expansive, gleaming kitchen. The sounds of my family laughing and rehearsing their lines for the guests drifted in from the other room. They were playing the role of the perfect, wealthy, happy family, and my role, as always, was the invisible support staff. I leaned against the counter and stared at my reflection in the black glass of the double oven. The woman staring back looked plain. She looked tired. She looked like someone who could be ignored, pushed aside, and forgotten. But as I looked closer, I saw the steel in her eyes. They saw a failure. They saw a ghost. They didn't know that the ghost was holding the deed to their future. I adjusted my collar and checked the temperature on the oven. This was it. I would play my part for one more hour. This was the last time I would ever be invisible. As I watched the condensation drip down the glass of the oven door, the years peeled away, transporting me back 15 years to a dining room that looked very much like this one. I was 13 years old, and Isabella was 10. That afternoon, I had come home with a gold medal from the State Math Olympiad. I had defeated 300 of the brightest minds in Illinois, solving complex calculus problems that would make most adults weep. Isabella, on the other hand, had received an honorable mention in her elementary school art contest for a watercolor painting of a horse that looked suspiciously like a potato. Dinner that night was a feast, but not for me. My parents had ordered lobster and expensive steak to celebrate Isabella. My father raised a toast, his face glowing with pride as he looked at my sister. "To Isabella," he beamed, "for showing such creative spirit. Art is the window to the soul, and it must be nurtured." I sat there, gripping my fork, waiting for my turn, waiting for someone to ask about the heavy metal in my pocket or the certificate I had placed on the sideboard, but the moment never came. When the housekeeper brought out a large vase of fresh hydrangeas to decorate the table, my mother noticed a water ring forming on the polished wood. Without looking, she reached out, grabbed my state champion certificate, and slid it under the vase. "There," she said, satisfied. "That protects the finish." I stared at the paper, the gold foil seal now crushed under 5 pounds of glass and water. I didn't say a word. I simply ate my potatoes. That was the night I learned that in the Briarwood household, competence was invisible, but mediocrity was celebrated if it was wrapped in a pretty package. This philosophy extended to our education. My parents sent Isabella to a prestigious private arts academy where the tuition cost more than the average American annual salary. They claimed she needed a specialized environment to foster her delicate genius. For me, they chose the local public high school. When I asked why, my mother didn't even look up from her fashion magazine. "Oh, Helena, you are so self-sufficient," she said dismissively. "You don't need hand-holding. You'll thrive anywhere. Isabella is different. She needs support." She made it sound like a compliment, but it was a sentence to solitude. Yet, that public school became my training ground. While Isabella was learning how to blend colors, I was learning how to survive. I wanted money of my own, money they couldn't touch, so I took up a paper route. But I didn't just deliver papers. I obsessed over the map. I timed the traffic lights. I calculated the weight distribution in my bag. Within 2 months, I had optimized the route to be 30% faster than any previous carrier, allowing me to take on a second route in the same time block. I was 13, and I was manually running logistics algorithms in my head. I started saving every penny. I had a goal. I wanted a high-performance computer to learn coding. I hid the cash in a hollowed-out biology textbook, stacking the bills like bricks in a wall I was building around myself. Then came my 16th birthday. I remember waking up with a flutter of excitement, thinking that perhaps 16 was a big enough number to warrant attention. I walked downstairs to a silent kitchen. There was a note on the fridge. "Isabella has a runway show at the mall today. Big opportunity." Back late, there is lasagna in the freezer. They had forgotten. Or rather, they had remembered. Weighed against Isabella's amateur modeling gig at a local department store, and made their choice. I didn't cry. I walked to the convenience store 3 blocks away, bought a single slice of packaged chocolate cake and a candle. I sat on a bench in the neighborhood park, shielding the flame from the wind with my hands. I sang happy birthday to myself in a whisper. As I blew out the candle, I didn't wish for love. I wished for power. 2 weeks later, I came home to find my room ransacked. My hollowed-out biology textbook lay open on the bed. Empty. My stomach dropped. I ran downstairs to find my mother holding a garment bag, Isabella squealing with delight beside her. "Mom," I choked out. "My money. The money in my book." "Oh, Helena, don't be dramatic," my mother said, smoothing down the fabric of a designer prom dress. "We were a little short on cash flow this month, and Isabella simply had to have this dress for the spring formal. It is essential for her social standing." "That was for my computer," I said, my voice trembling. "I worked for 2 years for that." My mother walked over and placed her hands on my shoulders, looking me deep in the eyes with that terrifyingly earnest expression she used to manipulate me. "Helena, look at me. You are the strong one. You can always earn more money. Isabella is fragile. She needs these moments to feel confident. You are helping the family. Isn't that enough?" They didn't see it as theft. They saw it as a reallocation of resources from the sturdy workhorse to the show pony. They penalized me for my competence and rewarded her for her neediness. I stopped saving cash at home after that. I opened a bank account they didn't know about, and I stopped talking to them about my life. I built a wall of silence so thick that nothing could get in or out. The final crack in the foundation happened at my high school graduation. I was the valedictorian. I was going to give the speech. I had told them the time 3 separate times. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of parents. I saw hundreds of proud faces, cameras flashing, fathers wiping away tears. But in the row reserved for the Briarwood family, there were 3 empty seats. I delivered my speech about resilience and the future, my voice booming across the stadium, but my eyes never left those empty chairs. They arrived just as the ceremony ended, flustered and loud. "We are so sorry," my father said, breathless, as I walked off the field holding my diploma. Isabella broke a nail right down to the quick. It was bleeding everywhere. We had to find an emergency salon. It was a crisis. I looked at Isabella. She was examining her freshly manicured hand. looking bored. She didn't even say congratulations. "It's fine," I said, and I meant it. It was fine because in that moment, the last thread of hope snapped. I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was their insurance policy. I was the backup generator kept in the basement, ignored until the lights went out. They loved me only as a utility. I looked at them, my father sweating in his suit, my mother fussing over Isabella's hair, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. I would go out into the world. I would build something massive. I would climb so high that when I looked down, they would be nothing but specks. I would succeed in a language they couldn't speak, in a world they couldn't enter. Standing in the kitchen 15 years later, the smell of roasting turkey bringing me back to the present, I adjusted my cuffs. I had kept that vow. I had climbed the mountain, and now, I was about to start the avalanche. I left for university with 2 suitcases and a letter confirming a full academic scholarship for systems engineering. I did not look back at the driveway as I pulled away, nor did I expect a farewell party. I had already removed myself from the family ledger. While I was settling into a state university known for its grit and technical rigor, my parents were busy buying Isabella's way into a prestigious private art college. Her grades were abysmal, but my father's checkbook was persuasive, covering tuition fees that could have bought a small island. My new life was a study in grayscale. I rented a basement apartment that smelled permanently of mildew and boiled cabbage, located 3 miles from campus. My diet consisted almost entirely of instant noodles and tap water. I did not have the luxury of time for parties or social clubs. By day, I was absorbing advanced calculus and network theory. By night, I was the graveyard shift manager at a mid-sized logistics warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was there, under the buzzing hum of industrial lights and the beep of forklifts, that I saw the bleeding wound in the industry. I watched trucks depart with full loads and return empty. I saw drivers sitting idle for hours waiting for paperwork. I saw routes that zigzagged across the map like a drunkard's walk, wasting fuel and time. The inefficiency was staggering. It wasn't just bad management, it was a mathematical offense. My brain began to itch with the solution. I started sketching algorithms on the back of shipping manifests. I wasn't just tracking boxes. I was building a digital nervous system that could predict traffic, load weight, and route efficiency in real time. Stratosphere Systems was born between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning. The contrast between my life and my sister's was a split screen of absurdity. At 3 in the morning, I would be huddled in my freezing apartment, wrapped in a blanket, debugging thousands of lines of code until my eyes burned. At that exact same moment, my phone would buzz with a notification. Isabella had posted a photo. She was in Tulum or Aspen or the Hamptons, holding a cocktail, tagged as a content creator. My parents were funding these excursions under the guise of market research and networking for her upcoming fashion brand. I reached a critical juncture during my junior year. I had the architecture of the software built, but I needed server space. I needed high processing power to run the simulations. I needed $10,000. It was a paltry sum compared to what my parents spent on their country club membership, but to me, it was a mountain. I swallowed my pride. I picked up the phone. My father answered on the 3rd ring. I didn't ask for a gift. I presented it as a business proposition. I offered to pay him interest at 5%, higher than what the banks were offering. I explained the scalability of the software, the desperate need in the market. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a sigh. "Helena," he said, his voice dropping into that patronizing tone he reserved for explaining simple concepts to slow children. "Money is a tool. It must be invested where it will grow. You are talking about trucking software. It is dry. It is boring. There is no flash to it. It solves a billion-dollar problem. Dad," I countered, gripping the phone tight. "Isabella is launching her fashion line next month," he interrupted. "That is where the future is. Branding, image, lifestyle. That is what people buy. We are putting our liquidity into that. I can't tie up capital in your little computer project. It's just too risky." He hung up. He had bet on the peacock and starved the workhorse. I sat on my mattress for 10 minutes, staring at the wall. Then I stood up and went to work. I sold my car the next day. It was a beat-up sedan, but it brought in $3,000. For the rest, I went to a predatory lender near campus that preyed on desperate students. The interest rate was criminal, but I signed the papers without shaking. I walked 3 miles to class and 5 miles to the warehouse every single day through rain and snow. My shoes wore through the soles, so I lined them with cardboard. I was alone, truly and completely. 6 months later, the inevitable happened. Isabella's fashion line. Bella's Vibe launched with a massive party that cost more than my entire education. The clothes were poorly made, derivative, and overpriced. The company folded in less than half a year, but my parents didn't let her fall. I found out through an aunt that they had quietly sold a plot of land my grandfather had left them, land that was supposed to be a family legacy to pay off Isabella's suppliers and avoid a lawsuit. In the same week, they bailed her out. I received a notification that my small monthly allowance for emergencies, which I had never touched, had been terminated. They cut me off to plug the hole in Isabella's sinking ship. I didn't call to complain. I didn't have time. I was standing in the office of the warehouse owner, a gruff, chain-smoking man named Miller. I had my laptop open on his desk. "This tells me where my trucks are," he asked, squinting at the screen. "It tells you where they should be," I corrected. "And it tells you that if you switch the routing on the Cleveland fleet, you will save 14% on fuel by Tuesday." He looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. He knew I was the girl who walked to work in the snow. He knew I stayed later than anyone else. "How much?" he grunted. "For you, $500 a month for the beta license," I said. He pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check for $6,000. "I'll take a year," he said. "If it works, I'll tell my brother. He runs a fleet in Ohio 3 times this size." I walked out of that office holding the check. The wind outside was howling, but I didn't feel the cold. I looked at the piece of paper in my hand. It was more than money. It was validation. While my parents were burning their heritage to keep Isabella warm, I had just struck the spark that would burn their world down. My empire had begun with a single check, signed by a man in a dusty warehouse, while my family toasted to their own delusions. 2 years after graduation, the headquarters of Stratosphere Systems was not a glass tower in Silicon Valley. It was a 300-square-foot room in a shared workspace building that smelled faintly of damp carpet and desperate ambition. There were only 4 of us myself, 2 junior developers I had poached from a hackathon, and a part-time network engineer named Marcus, who accepted equity instead of a salary. We were running on caffeine and the terrifying adrenaline of impending insolvency. The crisis hit on a Tuesday at 2 a.m. A catastrophic cascade failure in our primary server cluster threatened to wipe out the routing data for our 3 biggest regional clients. If we lost that data, the trucks would stop moving, the contracts would be voided, and my company would be dead by sunrise. For 48 hours, I did not leave that room. I did not sleep. I lived on stale bagels and energy drinks, my eyes burning as I rewrote the database architecture in real time while Marcus physically swapped out hard drives. The air in the room was thick with tension, and the hum of cooling fans running at maximum capacity. Somewhere around hour 36. My phone rang. It was my mother. I debated ignoring it, but the fear that something tragic had happened made me slide the unlock button with a trembling hand. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the desk, my fingers never leaving the keyboard. "Helena," her voice was sharp, cutting through the noise of the server fans. "I cannot believe you are not here." "Where?" I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. "Princess's birthday party," she snapped. The princess was Isabella's Pomeranian. "We have a caterer, Helena, a caterer for the dogs, and you are the only one missing. It looks terrible for the family image." I stared at the screen, where a progress bar was inching agonizingly toward recovery. "Mom, I am working. I have a crisis." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Isabella told us all about it. She said your boss is a tyrant who makes you file paperwork until midnight. Honestly, Helena, if you had just applied yourself more in school, you wouldn't be stuck as a lowly secretary at a warehouse. It is embarrassing to tell my friends what you do. I froze. My fingers hovered over the keys. A secretary. That was the narrative Isabella had spun. She had reduced my struggle, my ownership, and my title of CEO down to secretary, so that my parents wouldn't question why I was always busy but never famous on the internet. It was a brilliant, cruel lie that kept their expectations low and their questions to a minimum. Right, I said, a dry, humorless laugh escaping my throat. My boss is a real nightmare. I have to go. Mom, I have to file papers. I hung up before she could respond. Anger was a better fuel than caffeine. I channeled it into the code. 6 hours later, the system stabilized. We had saved the data, but the sharks smelled blood in the water. A week later, a local angel investor requested a meeting. He was a slick man in a suit that cost more than my car. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he had heard about our stability issues and assumed we were desperate. He slid a term sheet across the table at the coffee shop where we met because I was too ashamed to bring him to our office. $200,000, he said, tapping the paper, for 51% of the company, and naturally, we would bring in our own management team. You have done a great job with the coding, Helena, but you are not a CEO. We would need you to step down, maybe stay on as a consultant. It was a lifeline. It would pay off my debts. It would let me sleep. But looking at that number, I felt a cold rage. He wasn't buying a failing company. He was trying to steal a rocket ship before it launched. He saw a young woman in a cheap blazer and assumed I was weak. No, I said, sliding the paper back. He laughed. You are 6 months away from bankruptcy. This is charity. This is theft, I corrected him, standing up. My algorithm is worth 10 times this valuation today, and it will be worth 100 times that in a year. I would rather starve than sell my life's work for scraps. I walked out, leaving him stunned. I was shaking, but I was free. While I was fighting for survival, my parents were busy digging a deeper hole. Isabella had decided that her true calling was not fashion, but wellness. She wanted to open a chain of high-end luxury spas called Lumina. My parents, ever the believers in her imaginary potential, mortgaged their lake house, the one where we spent our summers, to fund the lease on a prime downtown location. They poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into marble floors, gold leaf fixtures, and imported organic mud, convinced this was the venture that would finally make them rich. I watched from a distance as they posted photos of the grand opening, champagne flowing, while I was negotiating the deal that would change everything. I had secured a meeting with the director of operations for a national trucking conglomerate. I didn't have a fancy office or a marketing team. I had a laptop and a simulation. I showed him the data. I showed him how Stratosphere Systems could reduce his fuel consumption by 30% by optimizing idle times and route deviations. 30% is impossible, he said, crossing his arms. Give me 5 trucks for a month. I challenged him. If I don't hit the target, I will pay for the fuel myself. If I do, you sign a fleet-wide contract. He took the bet. 30 days later, the data came back. We hadn't saved 30%. We had saved 34%. The contract was signed on a Tuesday. It was a 7-figure deal. The initial deposit alone was enough to pay off every cent of debt I owed. Move us into a real office and hire 10 new engineers. I paid off the student loans. I paid off the predatory lenders. I bought back the small percentage of equity I had given to Marcus, making him a wealthy man, though he chose to stay. But I didn't buy a Porsche. I didn't buy a penthouse. I kept driving my dented sedan. I kept wearing my simple slacks and button-down shirts. I reinvested 90% of the profit back into the company to build the next version of the software. To my family, nothing had changed. They saw me drive up in the same old car for Thanksgiving, wearing the same clothes, and they whispered. My aunt pulled me aside, pressing a $20 bill into my hand with a pitying look. Just for some groceries, dear, she whispered. We know things are hard for you. Isabella says the job market is tough for secretaries right now. I looked at the $20. Then I looked at Isabella, who was loudly complaining that the diamond chandelier in her new spa wasn't sparkling enough. "Thanks, Auntie," I said, pocketing the bill. They thought I was destitute. They thought I was a failure. They had no idea that the secretary was building an empire in the shadows, brick by digital brick, while their golden girl was building a castle on quicksand. The silence was my weapon, and I was sharpening it every single day. The collapse of Isabella's empire did not happen with a bang, but with a rash. Specifically, a severe allergic reaction that spread across the faces of 3 high-profile socialites who had visited Lumina, her luxury spa chain. It turned out that the imported volcanic mud Isabella had been marketing as a miracle cure was actually a mix of expired clay and harsh industrial fillers she had purchased in bulk from a shady overseas supplier to cut costs. The lawsuits were immediate, vicious, and public. My parents went into full damage control mode, watching from the sidelines. I saw them drain their retirement accounts, not to refund the victims, but to hire aggressive PR firms and defense attorneys to bury the story. They were throwing their golden years into a fire to keep Isabella warm for just a few minutes longer. It was in the middle of this chaos that my phone rang. It was the first time my mother had called me in over a year. There was no hello, no how are you, just a frantic, breathless demand. "We need $5,000. Helena," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Right now, we need to pay a retainer for a new lawyer, and the bank transfer from the investment account is pending until Monday. Transfer it to your father. We will pay you back next week." I sat in my office chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline. $5,000. To me, at that moment, it was a rounding error. It was less than what my company spent on server cooling in a week. But I needed to know. I needed to see if there was any humanity left in them, or if I was truly just an ATM that they had forgotten the PIN to. "I don't have it, Mom," I lied, my voice steady. "Rent just went up, and my car needed repairs. I have maybe $200 in my checking account." The silence on the other end was heavy, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "You are useless," she hissed. The venom in her voice was startling. 28 years old, and you can't even scrape together $5,000 to help your sister in a crisis. What is the point of you? "Helena, you just take up space." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the screen. I didn't feel hurt. I felt confirmed. I turned my chair around to face the 3 monitors on my desk. On the center screen was a live dashboard showing the real-time operations of Stratosphere systems. We had just deployed in Europe. The map was lighting up with active nodes in London, Berlin, and Paris. Our annual recurring revenue had just crossed into 8 figures. I was not just scraping by. I was wealthy. I was quietly, privately, and astronomically successful. That afternoon, I received an email from an editor at Forbes. They wanted to feature me in their 30 under 30 list. They called me a hidden disruptor in the logistics industry. It was the kind of validation most people dream of. I typed a polite reply declining the interview and refusing to provide a photo. "I prefer my work to speak for itself," I wrote. I wasn't ready to be seen yet. The reveal had to be timed perfectly. 2 weeks later, the stakes escalated. A black town car waited for me downstairs to take me to a meeting that could change the trajectory of the entire industry. Omnicargo, a logistics giant with a market cap in the billions, had approached me. They didn't want to license my software anymore. They wanted to own it. The meeting took place on the 50th floor of a steel and glass tower in the financial district. The conference room was vast, with a table that looked like it stretched for miles. Sitting on one side were 5 men in bespoke suits, the sharks of Wall Street, the corporate raiders who ate startups for breakfast. Sitting on the other side was just me, in my off-the-rack blazer and sensible shoes. "Ms. Briarwood," the lead negotiator began, sliding a folder across the polished mahogany. "We have done our due diligence. Your code is impressive, but you are a small fish in a very big ocean. OmniCargo is prepared to offer you a generous exit package so we can integrate your technology into our global infrastructure. I opened the folder. The number they proposed was insulting. It was large enough to retire on. Certainly. But it was a fraction of the actual value. They were betting on my naivety. They saw a young woman alone in a room full of powerful men and assumed I would be intimidated. I closed the folder and pushed it back. My client retention rate is 99%, I said, my voice projecting clearly in the acoustic perfection of the room. My software saves an average of 18% on operational costs within the first quarter. You aren't buying a startup. You are buying the only solution to your bleeding margins. If you want the stratosphere, you will need to recalculate the value of your own survival. The room went silent. The lead negotiator narrowed his eyes, reevaluating the predator he thought he had cornered. While I was engaging in high-stakes corporate warfare, Isabella was fighting a different kind of battle on her phone screen. Later that night, while reviewing revised term sheets, I saw a notification pop up. It was a video from Isabella, cross-posted to all her social media channels. She was sitting on the floor of her bedroom, wearing oversized sweats, no makeup, looking artfully disheveled. The lighting was dim, designed to evoke sympathy. "Guys," she whispered, wiping away a non-existent tear. "I am just going through so much right now. The haters are trying to tear down my dreams. But what hurts the most is when your own family turns their back on you. You know, like, you have people who share your blood, but when you are drowning, they just watch. It is so selfish. Some people only care about their own little lives and can't spare a dime for their family." The comments section was flooded with support. "Stay strong. Queen, your sister sounds toxic. Cut off the negativity." I read the comments, and for a fleeting second, I felt the urge to reply. I could post a screenshot of my bank balance. I could post the legal documents showing the fraud she had committed. I could destroy her narrative in seconds. But I closed the tab. Reacting would bring me down to her level. It would make me a participant in her drama. I wasn't a participant. I was the author of the ending. I looked back at the contract OmniCargo had sent over after I walked out of the first meeting. They had tripled their offer. They were taking me seriously now. I picked up my pen and began to mark up the red lines on the intellectual property clause. My mother called me useless because I wouldn't give her $5,000. Meanwhile, I was negotiating a deal that would secure my financial freedom for generations. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't a screaming match. It wasn't a Facebook post explaining my side of the story. The best revenge was a success so undeniable, so colossal, that it would render their opinions of me statistically irrelevant. I didn't need to win an argument, I just needed to win the game. And as I looked at the valuation numbers on the page, I knew I was already holding the winning hand. I just had to wait for the right moment to lay it down. The boardroom at OmniCargo was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of polished mahogany and glass, situated high enough in the skyline to look down on the clouds. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that required a jacket, a subtle psychological tactic to make everyone but the executives feel uncomfortable. I sat opposite the CEO, a man named Sterling who had built his reputation on swallowing smaller companies whole. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. $80 million, Sterling said, leaning back in his leather chair as if he had just bestowed a kingdom upon a peasant. "That is our final offer. It is a fair price for a niche logistics platform." I looked at the number. $80 million. To anyone else, it was a fortune. To my parents, it would have been proof of divinity. But I knew the math. I knew that Stratosphere Systems was saving OmniCargo an estimated $200 million annually in fuel and maintenance costs if fully integrated. Offering me $80 million was not a purchase. It was a robbery. I didn't blink. I didn't counter. I simply closed the folder, stood up, and smoothed the front of my blazer. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But I think we are done here." Sterling's eyes widened. He had expected me to haggle. He had expected me to beg for 90. He had not expected me to walk away. "Ms. Briarwood, sit down. You are making a mistake. You won't find another buyer with our liquidity. And you won't find another algorithm that solves your routing crisis, I replied. Good luck explaining your third-quarter fuel losses to your shareholders. I turned and walked toward the double doors. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. It was the longest walk of my life. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to take the money, to be safe, but I kept walking. My hand touched the cold metal of the door handle. Wait, Sterling's voice cracked. Sit down. Let's talk about the preferred stock options. 40 minutes later, the new term sheet was printed. The number had changed. $150 million. It was a combination of cash and preferred stock, with a guaranteed retention bonus and a position as senior advisor for the transition period. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I expected to feel a rush of adrenaline, a desire to scream or cry. Instead, I felt a profound, quiet relief. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being lifted off my shoulders after hiking up a mountain for 10 years. I signed my name Helena Briarwood in blue ink. With that signature, I had ceased to be a struggling entrepreneur and had become a centimillionaire. By the time the taxes were calculated and the transaction fees were settled, I was looking at a net liquid worth of just over $90 million. The money hit my account on a Tuesday morning. I celebrated by buying a bagel and coffee from the cart outside my office. Then, I called a high-end real estate broker and bought a penthouse in the heart of downtown Chicago. It was a glass box in the sky, offering a 360-degree view of the city and the lake. I paid in cash. However, I did not move in. I kept my damp, cramped rental apartment. I kept my old furniture to the outside world, and specifically to any prying eyes from my family. I was still Helena, the struggling data worker. The penthouse remained empty, a sanctuary of silence that I visited when I needed to breathe, a secret kingdom that only I knew existed. That same week, I made my first significant expenditure. I wired $1 million to a foundation dedicated to providing STEM education for underprivileged children in the inner city. I did it anonymously. I thought of my parents, who frequently bought tickets to charity galas for $5,000 just to be photographed on the red carpet, yet never actually donated a cent to the causes. They used charity as a costume. I used it as a tool. Knowing that my money would buy computers for kids who were hiding cash in hollowed-out textbooks just like I once did, gave me a satisfaction that no luxury car ever could. It was in this strange limbo between my two lives that the phone rang. Helena, my father's voice came through the line. It was jarring to hear him. He sounded older, his voice lacking its usual booming arrogance. There was a thin veneer of triteness, but underneath, I detected a tremor of anxiety. Your mother and I were talking. We haven't seen you in so long. It is Christmas. You should come home. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it. Home. You want me to come to the lake house? Of course, he said, forcing a chuckle that sounded like dry leaves crunching. We are family, after all, and, well, we know things have been tough for you. We want to make sure you are okay. Isabella will be there. She is eager to see you. Isabella eager to see me. That was the tell. Isabella had never been eager to see anything that didn't have a flash on it. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. I didn't think about it. I investigated it. I logged into the credit monitoring tools I had access to through my company's financial vetting software. I ran a query on my parents' assets. The results that populated my screen were a cascade of red numbers. The lake house, the Briarwood ancestral jewel, was 3 months behind on mortgage payments. A notice of default had been filed. They were drowning. Isabella's legal bills and the settlements for the spa disaster had drained them dry. They weren't calling me because they missed their daughter. They were calling me because they needed a fresh credit profile. I pieced it together instantly. They couldn't refinance the house because their credit was ruined. They needed a cosigner. They needed someone with a clean, albeit modest, credit history to vouch for a new loan. They assumed that since I had a steady job at the warehouse and lived frugally, I probably had decent credit, even if I was poor. They intended to use my name to save their house. likely sticking me with the debt when they inevitably defaulted again. They weren't inviting me to dinner, they were inviting a scapegoat. I sat in my empty penthouse, looking out at the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. I could see the snow swirling around the skyscrapers. I took a sip of water. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "You want me to come home? I'll come home." I picked up the phone and texted my father back. "I'll be there. I'll bring wine." I stood up and walked to the window. The reflection in the glass showed a woman who was no longer the girl they had ignored. They were setting a trap for a mouse, unaware that they had just invited a wolf into their living room. The play was set. I would go to their dinner. I would let them think they had won. And then, I would show them exactly what value really looked like. The contract was signed. The money was in the bank. And for the first time in my life, I was looking forward to Christmas. The dining room was a theater of shadows and candlelight, orchestrated to hide the fraying edges of the Briarwood estate. We took our seats at the long mahogany table, which was set with the family's best china plates that I knew my mother was terrified of chipping because she could no longer afford to replace them. The VIP guest my parents had been so frantic to impress was seated to my right. His name was Mr. Henderson, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and a suit that looked like it had been bought off the rack at a discount department store. I recognized him immediately, though he didn't remember me. He wasn't a high-powered investor or a celebrity. He was a senior loan officer at the local bank where my father had held his accounts for 30 years. My father wasn't entertaining a client. He was courting an executioner, trying to buy time on a debt that was already past due. My father stood at the head of the table, carving the turkey with a performance of jovial authority that made my stomach turn. "For our star," he announced, placing a glistening, succulent drumstick onto Isabella's plate. She clapped her hands like a toddler, her diamond bracelets jingling. "And for our guests, the breast meat, tender and white." When he got to me, the performance faltered. He sliced off a thin, dry piece of the turkey breast, the kind that feels like sawdust in your mouth, and dropped it onto my plate without a word. "White meat is healthier for you, Helena," my mother added quickly, sensing the slight, "We know you don't get much exercise sitting in that warehouse all day." I didn't argue. I simply unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. The wine was poured the premium reserve my father had bragged about, which was actually a $20 bottle from the supermarket decanted into a crystal pitcher to hide its origin. As we ate, the conversation inevitably gravitated toward the favorite subject of the Briarwood household, Isabella's imaginary future. "The spa situation was actually a blessing in disguise," my mother said, gesturing with her fork. "Isabella has been approached by a producer. They are talking about a reality TV show, The Real Heiresses of Chicago. Can you imagine? It is going to be massive." "It is all about personal branding," Isabella chimed in, talking with her mouth full. "People love a comeback story. I'm going to be the face of resilience. We are looking at 7-figure endorsement deals by next Christmas." Mr. Henderson nodded politely, though I noticed he was checking his watch under the table. He looked tired. He looked like a man who knew that reality TV contracts didn't pay mortgages that were 6 months in arrears. "And what about you, Ms. Briarwood?" Mr. Henderson asked, turning to me in a desperate attempt to change the subject. "Your father mentioned you work in logistics." I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him that I had just reshaped the logistics infrastructure of the Western Hemisphere. My father cut me off with a loud, booming laugh. "Oh, don't bore yourself with that, Jim," my father said, waving his hand dismissively. "Helena works in IT support. You know, have you tried turning it off and on again? That sort of thing. She fixes computers at a depot. It barely pays the rent, but it is honest work, I suppose." "She is very thrifty," Isabella added, leaning in with a conspiratorial smirk. She reached out and flicked the lapel of my navy coat, which was draped over the back of my chair. "I mean, look at this coat. She has been wearing this style for years. It is so vintage. I keep telling her I can take her shopping when my first check comes in. Get her something from this decade." I glanced at the coat. It was a Loro Piana Vicuña wool trench. Custom fitted in Milan, it cost more than Isabella's entire wardrobe combined. But to eyes trained on logos and flash, true quality was invisible. "I like it," I said softly, taking a sip of the acrid wine. "It keeps me warm." My father refilled Mr. Henderson's glass with a shaking hand. I watched the liquid splash slightly onto the tablecloth. He was sweating. The desperation was radiating off him like heat waves. He was terrified that Henderson would bring up the foreclosure before dessert. Suddenly, a sharp buzz vibrated through the table. Mr. Henderson apologized and pulled his phone from his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and then he stopped. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. He squinted, scrolled down, and then slowly raised his head to look at me. His expression had shifted. The polite boredom was gone, replaced by a look of confusion and dawning recognition. He looked at his phone again, then back at me, his eyes darting between my face and the screen. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to ask if I was Helena Briarwood, the one whose name was currently flashing across the financial news ticker on his screen, but before he could speak, my mother cleared her throat loudly. The pleasantries were over. It was time for the shakedown. "Helena," she began, her voice taking on a sickly sweet tone that set my teeth on edge. "Your father and I have been thinking. We know you have always been the steady one. You live such a simple life, no risks, no big expenses. Where is this going?" "Mother?" I asked, cutting through the preamble. My father reached under his chair and pulled out a thick manila folder. He placed it on the table, pushing aside the centerpiece. "We need to consolidate some things," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Just a bridge loan until Isabella's show gets greenlit. The bank needs a cosigner, someone with a clean credit history. We are overextended because we invested so heavily in your sister's future, which benefits us all, of course." He slid the folder toward me. It was a high-interest personal loan application, secured against nothing but the signer's future earnings. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking me to chain my financial identity to their sinking ship. "We just need your signature," Isabella said, examining her nails. "It is just a formality." Mom said, "Since you don't have a husband or kids, you don't really need your credit for anything important anyway. It is the least you can do after we let you come for Christmas." The audacity hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They wanted me to underwrite their delusions. They wanted the secretary to bail out the heiress. I looked at Mr. Henderson. He was staring at me with wide eyes, realizing exactly what was happening. He knew who I was now, and he knew exactly how astronomical the gap was between my reality and their assumption. He stayed silent, paralyzed by the sheer awkwardness of the moment. I picked up my knife and fork, and then, with deliberate slowness, I let them drop. Clang. The sound of the heavy silver hitting the fine china rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. My mother flinched. I looked from my father to my mother, and finally to Isabella. "Why?" I asked, my voice low and devoid of warmth. "Why should I do that?" "Excuse me?" my father sputtered, blinking as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Why?" I repeated, leaning forward. "Would I sign my name to a death warrant for a lie?" The veneer of civilization evaporated the moment the silverware hit china. My question hung in the air for a fraction of a second, before my father slammed his fist onto the table, making the wine glasses jump. The jovial host was gone, replaced by the red-faced, vein-popping tyrant I remembered from my childhood. "Because you owe this house," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "We fed you. We clothed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Do you think that was free, you ungrateful child? We are asking for a signature, not a kidney. You are going to sit there and lecture us about why after everything we sacrificed for you." The logic was as flawed as it was predictable. They viewed raising a child not as a responsibility, but as a loan that was now due for repayment with compounded interest. Isabella, sensing the shift in energy, immediately dissolved into tears. It was a performance she had perfected since she was 5 years old. Her shoulders shook, her lower lip trembled, and she looked up at me with wide, wet eyes that were completely devoid of actual sorrow. "I can't believe you are being so selfish." "Helena," she sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. "Look at Mom and Dad. They are old. They are stressed. Do you want to give Dad a heart attack? I just need this one break. Just one chance to get back on my feet. Why do you hate me so much?" I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth, unmoved. "One chance?" I asked, my voice calm and level, cutting through her dramatics. "Is this the one chance? Or was the one chance the boutique on Michigan Avenue that lost $200,000 in rent? Or was it the jewelry line where you sourced lead-tainted alloy and got sued? Or perhaps it was the Lumina spa disaster that is currently drowning this family in legal fees? By my count, Isabella. This is chance number 11, and that is a conservative estimate." My mother gasped, dropping her fork. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you keep a scorecard against your own sister? We are family. You don't count the cost when it comes to love." "I am not counting the cost of love, Mother," I replied. "I am counting the cost of incompetence. You have thrown nearly $500,000 of family assets into black holes labeled with Isabella's name. And now that you have run out of your own money, you want to burn through my credit rating too." My mother's face twisted into a sneer. She leaned over the table, her eyes hard and cruel. "And what else are you saving it for? Helena, look at you. You are 28, no husband, no boyfriend, no children. You are barren and alone. You have no legacy. What is the point of you having money or credit if you have nobody to spend it on? Helping your sister who actually has a life, who actually has a future, is your duty. It is the only useful thing you can do." The words were designed to maim. They were targeted strikes at the insecurities they assumed I had. They thought I was a lonely spinster hoarding pennies because I had nothing else. They didn't know I was building a kingdom. "My legacy," I said, meeting her gaze, "is not defined by who I marry. It is defined by what I build." My father laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Build? What have you built? You fix glitches for a trucking depot. Don't delude yourself, Helena. That little company you work for, what is it called? Stratosphere? Even if you owned the whole thing, which you obviously don't, it wouldn't be worth the inventory in Isabella's closet. Her brand has potential. Your job is a dead end." "Exactly," Isabella sniffled, wiping her eyes and instantly switching from victim to bully. "You are just jealous. Helena, you have always been jealous because I shine and you fade. You are a background character. You are an office rat. You hate that I have dreams while you are stuck in a cubicle. It is pathetic. Really." The insults rained down, a deluge of contempt that they had been holding back for years. They attacked my appearance, my personality, my career, and my worth as a human being. I sat there and took it, letting them empty their ammunition. I wanted them to say it all. I wanted no ambiguity left between us. Mr. Henderson, the banker, had been shrinking into his chair, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the upholstery. But as my father dismissed my company as worthless, something in Mr. Henderson snapped. He looked at his phone again, then at me, and his professional curiosity overrode his fear of the awkward domestic dispute. "Excuse me," Mr. Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly but loud enough to halt the tirade. "Mr. Briarwood, please." He turned his gaze to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Ms. Briarwood, I apologize for interrupting, but I was just reading the financial briefs on my phone. The ticker mentioned a merger. Are you Helena Briarwood, the founder and CEO of Stratosphere Systems?" The room went silent for a heartbeat. My father looked at Mr. Henderson with annoyance. "Jim, I told you," my father said, waving his hand impatiently. "She works there. She is in the IT department. It is a small startup, probably operating out of a garage. It is of no consequence." "No, Robert," Mr. Henderson said, his voice gaining strength as he realized the magnitude of the misunderstanding. You don't understand. Stratosphere Systems isn't a garage startup. It is the industry leader in autonomous logistics, and the Helena Briarwood listed here isn't an employee. She is the sole proprietor. My mother laughed nervously. Jim, you must be confusing her with someone else. Our Helena lives in a basement apartment. She drives a 10-year-old car. Look at her coat. Does she look like a CEO to you? She looks exactly like the woman in the article would look if she didn't want to be found. Mr. Henderson murmured, looking at me with new respect. I held Mr. Henderson's gaze and gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. He swallowed hard and sat back, clutching his phone like a holy relic. My father, however, was not ready to let reality intrude on his narrative. Enough of this nonsense, he snapped. Helena, pick up the pen. Sign the papers. Stop playing games and pretending you are something you are not. You are a small-time technician in a small-time company, and you are going to help your sister because we say so. A small-time company, I repeated, tasting the words. Is that what you think, Dad? You really think the stratosphere is small? Compared to what Isabella is going to achieve, it is microscopic, he spat. Now sign. I looked at the pen lying on the document. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint, the kind banks give away for free. They wanted me to use it to sign away my future. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I stood up slowly, towering over my seated parents. The air in the room shifted. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was the predator who had just decided to stop playing with its food. I think, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone, that we are done with the fiction portion of the evening. Sit down, my father commanded, his face turning purple. No, I said softly. I don't take orders from people who can't pay their own mortgage. I tapped the screen of my phone, unlocking it. You called my life's work quaint. You called me useless. You said my company wasn't worth a handbag. I think it is time you learned how to count. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, since you have the financial news open, why don't you read out loud the headline regarding the acquisition of Stratosphere Systems by Omni Cargo? I believe it broke about 6 hours ago. My parents froze. Isabella looked from me to the banker, a flicker of genuine fear finally appearing in her eyes. The game was up. I wasn't just ending the dinner, I was dropping the curtain on their entire reality. The silence that followed my challenge to Mr. Henderson was not the silence of peace. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a pressure vessel moments before it ruptures. My father and mother were staring at me, their mouths slightly agape, unable to process the shift in power dynamics that had just occurred. They looked at Mr. Henderson, who was clutching his phone with white knuckles, beads of sweat forming on his upper lip, and then they looked back at me. They were waiting for the punchline. They were waiting for me to apologize, to shrink back into the role of the submissive, invisible daughter. I did not shrink. Instead, I reached for my linen napkin. The movement was deliberate, almost theatrical in its slowness. I unfolded it, smoothed it over my lap, and then raised it to my lips. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with the kind of practiced, effortless elegance that my mother had spent decades trying to emulate but never quite mastered. It was a gesture of total dismissal. It said, without a word, that their rage, their demands, and their entire existence were of no more consequence to me than a crumb on my lip. I folded the napkin and placed it gently on the table next to my untouched plate. The soft rustle of the fabric was the only sound in the cavernous dining room. I will not be signing this loan application, I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the weight of absolute finality. I will not leverage my credit rating, nor will I expose my financial portfolio to the inevitable seizure that will occur when Isabella defaults, because she will default. It is not a matter of if, but when. Isabella let out a screech that sounded like tearing metal. She slammed her hands onto the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "Who do you think you are?" she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of ugly entitlement. "You talk about Financial portfolios and assets, like you actually have them. You are a data clerk. Helena, you have nothing to seize. The bank wouldn't even take your car as collateral because it is a piece of junk. You are just trying to sound important because you are jealous that Mom and Dad actually believe in me. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the layers of professional makeup and the designer clothes bought with stolen money, she was terrified. She was a child who had never been told no, and now that the world was finally saying it, she was crumbling. Actually, I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. I came here tonight with a very specific intention. I knew about the foreclosure notice. Dad, I knew about the debts. I came here with a check in my pocket that would have cleared the mortgage on this house and paid off the legal settlements for the spa disaster. My father's eyes narrowed. He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound, filled with scorn. A check, he sneered. What? Did you save up your Christmas bonus? What is it, $5,000? Maybe 10 if you starved yourself all year. Do you think $10,000 is going to save us? We are talking about hundreds of thousands. Helena, keep your pocket change. It is insulting. It wasn't $5,000, I said softly. But you are right about one thing. It doesn't matter now, because the attitude you have displayed tonight, the cruelty, the manipulation, the sheer lack of respect has made me change my mind. The check will stay in my pocket. Oh, stop the drama, my mother groaned, rolling her eyes. You are just making things up to feel superior. You don't have that kind of money. You never have. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked at the ceiling for a moment, as if contemplating a great cosmic joke, before bringing my gaze back to them. You are right, Mother, I said. I don't have company anymore. Stratosphere systems. It is not mine. Not as of this morning. The reaction was instantaneous. A wave of visible relief washed over my parents. It was a perverse, twisted reaction. They were relieved because my failure fit their worldview. If I had lost my company, if I had failed, then the natural order of things was restored. The anomaly was corrected. My mother let out a long, heavy sigh, shaking her head with a mix of pity and I told you so satisfaction. There it is, she said, gesturing to my father. I knew it. I knew something was wrong. That is why she is so defensive. She went bankrupt. That is what happens when you try to play businessman Helena. You don't have the head for it. You overreached, and now you have lost your little job. So that's it, my father said, his voice dripping with condescension. You are broke. You probably came here to ask us for money. Didn't you? That whole story about bringing a check? That was just a cover for your shame. You lost the company. Isabella started laughing. It was a cruel, high-pitched giggle. She pointed a manicured finger at me across the table. Oh my God, this is priceless, she crowed. The great genius is unemployed. She is jobless, and she had the nerve to lecture me about failure. At least I have a brand. At least I have followers. You have nothing. Helena, you are back to zero. Maybe if you ask nicely, I can hire you as my personal assistant. I need someone to steam my dresses. Mr. Henderson couldn't take it anymore. He shot up from his chair so fast it tipped backward, crashing onto the floor with a deafening bang. His face was pale, and sweat was running freely down his temples. He held his phone out like a shield, his hands trembling violently. Mr. and Mrs. Briarwood, please, he stammered, his voice cracking with panic. You need to stop. You don't understand what you're saying. Please, just look at the news. Look at the ticker. My father turned on him, annoyed. Sit down, Jim. Why are you so agitated? My daughter just confessed to being a failure. It is disappointing, but hardly news worth interrupting dinner for. She didn't confess to failure, Mr. Henderson practically shouted, his eyes wide with fear as he looked at me. She. I raised my hand, and Mr. Henderson fell silent instantly. He obeyed the command with the instinct of a man who recognizes true authority. I stood up. I didn't rush. I placed my hands on the edge of the table and leaned forward, bringing my face into the light of the chandelier. I wanted them to see my eyes. I wanted them to see that there were no tears, no shame, and no defeat in them. There was only ice. "I didn't say I went bankrupt," I said, my voice cutting through the room, enunciating every syllable with crystal clarity. "And I didn't say I lost the company." My mother frowned, confusion clouding her face. "But you said it isn't yours anymore." "It isn't," I confirmed. I paused. I let the silence stretch out, pulling it tight like a rubber band until I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. I looked at my father, whose sneer was beginning to falter. I looked at my mother, whose hands were clutching her pearls. I looked at Isabella, whose smile was frozen in place. "I didn't lose it," I said. "I sold it." My father blinked, his brain struggling to compute the information I had just delivered. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk slowly returning to his face as he decided that I must be lying, or at the very least, exaggerating a pitiful sum. "Sold it," he repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "And what did you get for it? Enough to buy a used Honda, maybe enough to pay off that coat you are wearing. Don't tell me you sold your little project for $5,000 and think you have made it big." I stood perfectly still. I looked at Isabella, who was watching me with a mixture of confusion and disdain. I looked at my mother, whose hand was trembling as she reached for her wineglass, and finally, I looked directly into my father's eyes. "I sold it for $150 million, I said. "Cash," the words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For 3 seconds, there was no sound in the room except for the howling of the winter wind battering the window panes. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, that it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Then, the crash. My mother's fingers had gone numb. The crystal wineglass slipped from her hand, hitting the hardwood floor and shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Red wine splashed across the hem of her expensive dress and onto the Persian rug she had been so worried about protecting earlier. But she didn't even look down. Her eyes were locked on mine, wide and unblinking, filled with a horror that had nothing to do with the mess on the floor. 150, she whispered, the numbers dying on her lips as if they were too large to be spoken. "It is confirmed." "Mr. Henderson said. His voice was no longer shaking. It was solemn, like a judge reading a verdict. He held up his phone, displaying the breaking news banner from the Wall Street Journal. "The press release went out this morning. Omnicargo has acquired Stratosphere Systems in an all-cash and stock transaction valued at $150 million. It is the largest tech acquisition in the Midwest this quarter. Congratulations, Ms. Briarwood." Isabella's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The flush of anger drained away instantly, leaving her skin a sickly, pasty white. She looked as though she had been physically struck. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The influencer, the girl who lived for attention, was suddenly rendered mute by a reality she could not filter or edit. My father's jaw literally dropped. The deep lines of arrogance etched into his forehead seemed to freeze in place, paralyzed by the shock. He looked from Mr. Henderson's phone back to me, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to reconcile the daughter he had despised with the multimillionaire standing before him. "Helena," my mother stammered. Standing up so quickly her chair tipped over. She stepped over the broken glass, disregarding the wine soaking into her stockings. "Helena, darling, you are joking. Right? Is this a prank? 150 million. That is our family's money. We are a family." She reached out for me, her hands, which had pushed me away at the door, which had shoved my awards under vases, were now reaching for me with a desperate, clawing hunger. I took a step back. I moved with the precision of a fencer avoiding a clumsy strike. I looked at her hands as if they were covered in something infectious. "Don't touch me," I said. My mother froze. "But we are family." "Helena, baby, look at us. We are your parents. We love you." "Yes," I said. my voice cold and hard like the ice on the lake. You are my family, and this family has taught me a very valuable lesson tonight. You taught me that my value as a human being is measured exclusively by what I can give you. You taught me that affection is a transaction. And now that I have the means to give you everything you ever wanted, I am making a choice. I paused, letting them lean in, letting them hope. I choose to give you nothing. My father scrambled to his feet, his face flushing red again, but this time not with anger, but with a frantic, sickening desperation. He put on a smile that was so fake, so oily, it made my skin crawl. Now, Helena, he cooed, his voice changing pitch entirely. Don't be like that. You are a smart girl. You know I was just pushing you. I was using reverse psychology. I knew you had greatness in you. I just wanted to toughen you up. It was all for your own good. A father knows these things. And listen, $150 million is a lot of responsibility. You don't know how to handle that kind of wealth. We can help. I can manage the portfolio for you. We will keep it in the family. Yeah, Isabella chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate. We can start a business together, sisters. Think of the brand. Helena. We could be icons. I threw my head back and laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated liberation. It felt like breaking chains. You want to manage my money? I asked, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. Dad, you can't even manage your own mortgage. You are 3 months behind. You are facing foreclosure. That is just a temporary cash flow issue, he protested, sweating profusely. We can fix it. I know, I said. It is already fixed. They stopped, looking at me with a flicker of hope. You paid for it, my mother gasped, clutching her chest. Oh, Helena, I knew it. I knew you wouldn't let us lose the house. I didn't pay it for you, I corrected her. I hired a private wealth management firm last week. My first instruction to them was to acquire the debt on this property from the bank. Mr. Henderson facilitated the sale of the note this morning. I turned to Mr. Henderson. Is that correct? Mr. Henderson nodded, looking at the floor. Yes, Ms. Briarwood. Your holding company now owns the mortgage on this estate. I turned back to my parents. The hope in their eyes died, replaced by a dawn of absolute terror. I don't just have the money, I said softly. I own the house. I own the chair you are sitting in. I own the roof over your head. And since you have defaulted on your payments for 90 days, I am exercising my right as the creditor. What? What are you saying? Isabella whispered. I am saying you have 30 days, I declared, my voice ringing with authority. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I am foreclosing. I intend to renovate. I think I will knock down these walls. They have too many bad memories. You can't do this, my father screamed, lunging forward but stopping when he saw the look in my eyes. It is Christmas. We are your flesh and blood. And this is business, I replied, throwing his own words back at him. Money must be invested where it generates a return, and this family, it is a bad investment. I walked over to the coat rack and picked up my cashmere coat. I slipped it on, buttoning it slowly. Isabella, I said, looking at my sister who was now sobbing into her hands, real tears this time. Good luck with your TikTok career. I hear the algorithm is tough. I walked to the front door. Now, if you will excuse me, I would like you all to leave my dining room eventually. Enjoy the turkey. It is a bit dry, but I am sure you are used to swallowing hard things by now. I opened the heavy oak door. The wind swirled in, bringing snowflakes that danced in the entryway light. I stepped out into the night. Behind me, the house erupted into chaos. I heard my mother screaming my name. I heard my father throwing something against the wall. I heard Isabella wailing. It was the sound of an empire collapsing. It was the sound of a false idol shattering. I walked to my rental car, the snow crunching satisfyingly under my boots. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, I didn't look back at the warm, glowing windows of the mansion. I backed out of the driveway, past the pristine pine trees, and onto the main road. The heater kicked in, blowing warm air onto my face. I reached over and turned on the radio. It was playing a Christmas song. I smiled. I was alone. I was driving a cheap car, but for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't heavy. I was light. I was free. The road ahead was dark and covered in ice, but I wasn't afraid. I had $90 million in the bank, a penthouse waiting in the city, and the absolute certainty that I would never, ever be invisible again. Freedom. I realized as I accelerated into the night, tasted like winter air and victory. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed Helena's journey from being the invisible daughter to the owner of her own destiny. If this story resonated with you, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow across the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the Veronica Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story of justice and triumph. See you in the next video.